We're constantly finding new species of slug in the UK. There are about 46 species, but as we get better and better at splitting them and identifying what's going on, the numbers increase. The good news is that very few of them are pests. The chances are that most slugs you will encounter are not going to be a pest slug attacking crops, but the 4 or 5 species that become numerous in crops and in fields, those are the pest species. And public enemy number 1 is the grey field slug, which is the little grey slug that you find in gardens and in crops. There are so many of them, it just does really well, and we've exported it around the world, so it is pretty much a worldwide pest anywhere where slugs can survive. The pest species are notable because they are relatively small. People will be familiar with some of the larger slugs that we get, but those tend not to be causing a huge amount of damage. But the pest species are small and therefore they can find refuge in the soil. When the crop is growing, then they perhaps don't need to seek refuge so much, they're sheltered by the crop. So it's small size, but also the ability to increase in numbers quite quickly in a range of circumstances. And what makes the grey field slug so important is that it is able to take every opportunity. Whenever the weather conditions are right, it can reproduce and grow, and it has a number of strategies which enable it to get through periods when the weather is bad. So it's just there all the time, looking for every opportunity to grow in numbers, and then with more slugs, even though they're relatively small, they will do a lot of damage to plants and to seeds. There are 2 or 3 species of what are called roundback slugs. They can at times become an important feature in a field, so it may just be a patch in a field that's got those in. I suppose in some circumstances they could be as important as the grey field slug, but usually the grey field slug is there leading the charge. There's another group of species which we don't see very often called the keeled slugs, and we don't see them very often because they habitually live deep in the soil, so they're more often regarded as pests of things like potatoes. People would love to find something that would attract slugs. Equally, if you could find something that would deter slugs from feeding, you might be able to spray that on the crop. All of the work we've done, where we've taken slugs, put them into arenas and videoed them overnight to see what they're doing, we've seen no evidence that they will turn towards a potential food source from a distance. So usually they come out, start moving around, and they literally have to virtually bump into the food before they will respond to it. With the slugs that are pest species, we see very little evidence that there is any attraction from a distance. There is some work being done on larger species of slug, ones which aren't crop pests, which suggest that they can respond to scent on the wind. Having bumped into the food, the slug spends its time constantly sampling what it's touching using those lower tentacles, effectively tasting what it's on. And if they find that it's a food source, or potentially a food source, they will often take a test nibble, a bite, and it's a bit like us eating food. If we like what we've sampled, we'll say, yes, I'll have more of that, please, and the slug will continue to feed. So in terms of slug pellets, which we have to use for controlling them, we're trying to make the pellets as palatable as possible so that when the slug bumps into it, it continues to feed. There is obviously a poison in there to provide the control, but we try to make sure that that's not deterring the slugs from feeding. So they bump into the pellet, they test it, they say, oh, this is food, and they will eat it, hopefully consuming enough of the food and the poison so that they're affected.